All right.
And my only other question is, how long are you anticipating that we will talk for? Like
until we finish talking.
okay,
It's unlikely to go for more than an hour and 9 minutes.
Yep. I could have answered that for you.
So if you provide single word responses, then what we'll find is there'll be a lot of silence.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But we still might go for an hour. Let's see.
Yeah.
I've only met Stephen's students twice, but he's used to me.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. They never will get used to you. They're still in a state of shock. Therapy's working.
All right, so welcome to the Holochain ecosystem with Stephen and Belinda here today. Today we're focusing on the Digital Value Capture Academy. It is the 8th of October in 2020. So welcome, Stephen and Belinda.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So tell us give us a brief introduction on yourselves, if possible. Belinda, can I start with you? Because I know you're going to be talking more today.
Sure. Okay. All right. So I had a career in the public sector and a big software company, global mega corp, and then I needed to take a long break, and now I'm back in the world of work, and I've actually been working periodically around the area of what gets called business value for about 25 years in different ways. You know, I haven't spent 25 years focused on it solely, but I'd had contact with a number of different approaches and frameworks over that period of time. And it was in March of 2019 when the Holochain Intensive was held on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. And I was there and Stephen was there, and Stephen gave a presentation about his work. And I thought, wow, he's got a giant brain. and that framework's really, really interesting. And I think he could really do well with somebody to help him translate his ideas for a broader audience than can currently understand them. And that was my thought, right? And we just serendipitously ended up working together later that year. And over time, I did some training with Stephen first, and then we ended up working together. And I was more and more interested in his framework and his giant mind. The more I got to know him, and you know, with really no agenda on my part. Like I never saw myself necessarily as the person who was the right person to work with him to do what I had a sense would be a useful exercise. But it's just we've just ended up working together in that way. And it's fun. Yeah. So I'll let Stephen introduce himself and then maybe talk a bit more about what we're actually doing together, the work with the projects that we're actually doing together.
Fantastic.
Well, my main claim to fame is I'm old. So I've been around a long time. So I've learned lots and had loads of time to actually grow with it. Because when I started, it was in the 1980s. We started Europe's first DOS-based multimedia company. About 2 months before we actually had any colors on a green screen. So we had to wait for our first 16 color. So I've been involved in early stuff. And then the internet was starting to be, it was mostly obviously military, and then back then it was academic, but then there was a big argument about whether you should put a GUI interface as well on the internet, and should regular people even be allowed to use it. You know, the techie gods at the time thought not. So I've been involved in a lot of firsts, and then later on in Silicon Valley, well, back in Europe, I got involved with some people to put the first bank on to underwrite the credit card transactions. So I've always been fascinated and curious. I looks like on paper I've done lots of things, but I've only ever done one thing, which is I can determine the worth of a good idea to introduce something new into an interconnected environment. I mean, it happens to be digital today, but it could be anything interconnected. And as the digital environment becomes more organic, we may get a convergence of that. So that's what I do, and I can deal with massive complexity and determine quite comfortably over a 10-year period the likely worth of what that would be to all the various parties. And I do it all in here. And then it was somebody, it was who headed up the government's welfare system here, Sue Varden, who said I should methodize it so that others could understand what I did and the workings out. And more importantly, later on, people encouraged me to write it so I could teach it, so other people, in particular young people, could actually use the methodology, not only to create value, measurable, validatable, capturable, tokenizable, tradable value, both of monetary, you know, regular money as we understand it with fiat, crypto, but the real currencies of value, human attributes, that the currencies that drive the world, how to actually find a way of harnessing that, and so that you can use those captured values for an intended outcome, for an intended purpose, and build entire structures around that, both economic, legal, financial. So that's what I tend to do. I model all of that. And then working with Belinda, it's just been brilliant because my passion is for young people. I'm of the view that our 5-year-olds are going to bring about a new age of enlightenment because of their interconnectedness. That's my kind of stance on everything. And so I'm working with younger people between, 20, in their 30s, predominantly who are looking at, have good ideas and want to transform and change the world, so that they can create the preconditions for the world for those 4 or 5-year-olds to actually do what they're going to do because they will want to. And I've been waiting for a Holochain to come along for about 20 years because you couldn't do without it. So yippee. And now what we're looking at is, well, how do we actually get 300,000 or 400,000 young, innovative people with passion that care? How do we empower them to do it? So that's where we got together. So, in simple terms, what you would get learning of, as a very elite, very, business school like Holt International Business School, where it costs a lot of money, how can we get that to every kid in the world? That's been our dream. That's what we're doing it. So that's the game.
So I part of the role that I play feels like a transformer. It's like, this is what it feels like some days. Like I take raw electrical current out of Stephen and step it down so that it can then be used by a whole other range of people. Yeah. So I'm actually not his intended audience, but I'm a bridge between him and his intended audience. And I just happen to be kind of age-wise, sort of, about in the middle of Stephen and his audience.
No one, she's underestimating. I've never seen anyone who can grasp those elements that I've got, because they're quite esoteric at times. I feel for my students because they're hard things to grasp. Because the best way I teach the business students is on the dynamics of this, is more kind of like quantum mechanics. It's talking about heat and heat exchange and reducing the pain of everyday life, and actually getting to a point of neutrality, and then, you know, injecting and exciting a new heat of desire, to an aspirational desire to change the world. But to put that into methodology, to put that into, to be able to put that into Western reductionist thinking without losing the essence or the meaning or the purpose or the power of what my methodology can do, is beyond me. And I'm just, you know, so grateful that Belinda's working with me and put up with me. And now when I see the work done, so that we can, you know, in the academy, that's our first sort of platform, and that's linked, and we've got our first app to underpin that as the functional tools. But what we're looking at sort of putting together is like a next version of a DAO, because when you, with Holochain, you can do a lot more than a DAO, and create the next generation of those, so that we can enable those young people to aggregate their economic, social, and political power, which they'll need to if they're going to make a difference. So we've got, so these are the sort of building bricks, the first level building bricks, and you know, roll on Holochain, so that we can start replacing the back end on the app, and then start putting together and working with other platforms that can capture these currencies, and then start using that other than just money, because there isn't enough money to change the world in such a short period of time, and we don't need it. We can create our own gold effectively through this capture process. Would you agree?
Yeah. So Stephen was already working on a series of apps that codify his framework and his methodology into a series of questions, so that people can DIY themselves through the process. Yeah. And what we're building in the academy is a series of courses, online courses that accompany the apps, so that depending on people's background and skill and experience level, they might need different kinds of support when they're using these apps and working through the process. So somebody who is a 40-something management consultant for the past 20 years, you know, has all kinds of skills that will probably set them up to take a running leap at this process and not need a lot of support, because the concepts and the way that the questions are framed and the way that the process is structured will just feel very familiar to them. Yeah. Some bright spark who's either still in or fresh out of university might want or need a bit more either self-directed or externally directed coaching to help them shape their ideas and to help them get the most out of the apps. So what we're building through the academy is a whole series of online courses, and then one-on-one coaching and mentoring offerings as well, that are at all different price points, like right from, you know, premium executive level mentoring, which is hundreds of dollars for, you know, per hour, down to, you know, send us your report out of the app and we'll review it for you and send you a 15-minute video with our recommendations for what, you know, the top 3 things you can do to improve your idea for $100, down to, you know, if you've got the first app, which is a free app, but you're struggling a little bit to understand, or you just want to understand more of the nuance behind the questions and the flow and the sequencing of it, then go buy this series of videos for $18. Yeah. So it's at this point we really are experimenting with, you know, what I mean. I'm not an instructional designer for a start, right? So you know, we're starting, as many people who build online courses do, with a whole lot of talking head video, right? And and we put it up and we see what's sticky and what works and what people get value out of, and then we'll refine it over time. I think it took me 4 months to come up with the tagline for the academy that we're now actually quite happy with, because it's just like the process of stepping down something complex from 10 out of 10 complexity, which is where Stephen lives because he's the originator of it, and it's, you know, it's his, it's all his, so he just lives at 10 out of 10 complexity. I think he got it down to probably 6 out of 10 complexity to teach students at Hult Business School, which was still pretty difficult for most of them to kind of wrap their brains around, but it worked. And really, to go to mass market, you need to be at about 2 out of 10 complexity. And I'm not sure we're quite at 2 out of 10 yet, but we're definitely down below a 6. So we're ready to start, you know, opening it up and have people use it and hopefully give us feedback and say this bit's still really confusing. And, you know, we just evolve it over time.
Super. On a side note, I know of an instructional designer who's moving back to Australia who's supposed to be absolutely like outstandingly brilliant. So I'll introduce you guys.
Please do. Yes, that would be very good.
All right. So it was funny when you mentioned I've got the kids building Lego just underneath me. It's funny when you mentioned the 5-year-olds, because at that moment, my 5-year-old was loudly opening the door and then somehow managed to hit his forehead on the door handle, just as you were telling me about the interconnected genius of the younger generation. So I was chuckling to myself there.
What interests me about them, well, what I deal with, what I've been dealing with all my life, is people. My passion is community, both community of common interests and geographic community. And here, when we moved to Australia 20 years ago, I've had the good fortune to have gigs which have taken me to just so many outback communities. I'm really passionate. But my day job has tended to be right at the top of town. People, industry leaders, politicians, and, you know, where the power lies. And their problem that they encounter is that technologists have interconnected them and their business, and they don't understand it. They actually can't do their job anymore, because you can't manage a complex multinational, you know, with a spreadsheet anymore. But that's what they've been using, you know. And so, you know, we'll go through what, you know, the digital convergence and digital transformation. You know, and they've had everyone in, all the big consulting firms in, and they still have no idea what does that mean. Okay, you know, is it good or bad? And so they'll always, at some point, take me into their office and ask me one question, which is, can I make retirement before I have to learn this shit? Okay. And then when I've said no, you'll just you'll be wearing a beacon saying your brand is that I hold ignorance of this as a virtue. It's not going to work. So the second conversation goes along the lines of, yeah, but if I've got to create trusted relationships, what's trust in any case? And how do you do that? I've got here, by ruthless behavior of siloing everything, killing anything I don't understand or like, and controlling as much as I can without giving anything to anyone. And now all of a sudden I'm in a world where I have to do the opposite. And I also don't understand. There are so many possibilities of what might occur as a consequence of any action I do. They're too much for me to calculate. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just, I'm running a multinational, I'm running a huge business or a country, and I have no idea what I'm doing because I don't understand the consequences. And the reason being is they genuinely, because when I talk to them, well, what about climate change? And they don't see the connection between digging a hole in the ground and burning something and then something dying, especially, like themselves or their grandchildren. It's just like they can't see it. They don't join the dots. And of course, people who are ecologists and environmentalists do. Do you want to close that window? That much?
Yeah.
We've got a dog out here, the neighbour's dog killing something, and of course, if you are, then you realise that there are unforeseen consequences, and they'll probably come back and bite you. But if you don't see that, then you're brazen, as we see people now profiteering from killing the planet, and and sort of quite brazen about it. But the thing about these 5-year-olds, when you look at where all this is going, and you look at what is the environment going to be like by the time they get to that age, they will know, they will understand, they will be inherently connected, probably physically as well, to everything. And they'll and it's that factor alone. And yeah, boys are boys. We'll be as we are. I'm sure kids in the future will be just like I was when I was 5-year-old. But actually there'll be something different about them. And not only that, they'll know that they haven't got much time. And so all the preconditions will be there for them. So my focus now, and with our learning, the next, because my system can determine, can calculate, can approximate and calculate and validate what would be the value impact of, say, a benefit. If you're going to introduce something beneficial into the interconnected world, like Holochain will do, what is the value impact of that on people's systems, business, the whole thing, everything? That's basically what I do. And so it is difficult for Belinda has to step that down so people can do that in bite-sized chunks with the app, so that they can get the hang of it, and then start to basically be able to totally change the whole notion of business, and of course what transactions are about, and ultimately the economy. So I think but it all comes back down to imagination and intent, and there are actors out there who have ill intent towards mankind, and they have very powerful organizations that can realize that. A lot of the organizations are just dumb. They're just dumb beasts, if you like. They are alive. They drive their own self. They gobble up resources. They do all sorts of things. And I can assure you, having worked with them, they're too stupid to actually be that bright to, orchestrate our destruction. It's just happening by default because the system is so stupid, and it's mostly because it does not account for most, as an asset at the end of the year. Look at corporates. Their asset sheet does not give what human capital they've got, natural capital, doesn't, or any of the total capital that those currencies have generated, which is what business is all about. Instead of that, they use this tiny little, piece over here called money, and everything is supposed to be understood. And it's no wonder why you kill the planet, because they're, like worms on your soil of a large farm have no asset value, but they actually do. I can calculate the asset value of that, and so that becomes actually chemicals, because they kill changes in perspective. And it's been really a privilege, say, with Holt, and just fabulous, helping young people, young business people, even just see how they can do business and change the world at the same time. So it's been really brilliant.
Super. So you kind of touched on these things, guys, but I would like to get a tiny bit more sense on, like, just really clear, like, what you believe about the world as it is right now that's making what you're doing so important.
Sorry, we lost you there. I think you froze.
Froze. So yeah, you kind of touched on it, Stephen, but just wanted to come back to what you believe about the world right now that makes what you're doing so important.
I do look, I'm banned from talking about my capacity. I wouldn't wish on anybody what I can see and what I can do. I cry because I can, I can see things. I can do 10 years out. So if you ask me to look at the health system, I can tell you how many are going to die almost, what pain is going to be suffered unnecessarily because the system is broken. I can measure the impact, the currency impact of what the system is doing today. It's so that the brutality of the policy rather than having a kind policy in health. I can understand, I can measure all of that right down to the problems, right down to the individual, the very individual, and what happens in their family. And what does that actually mean, and what will it mean? And it's horrendous. And when you add all of those things together, what I see is so much unnecessarily death, so much unnecessary pain and suffering. Um, for the reasons which a lot of us know already, greed and ignorance and a thing called stupidity, where even I think the most people who are most dangerous are ones who are stupid. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, there's a definition. Look up stupidity under wiki. There's some laws on stupidity, and it comes from Latin stupor. It's where even in clever, intelligent, well-educated people behave in a sense of stupor, where they don't seem to understand the meaning or the consequences of what they do, and they just they're switched off, they're dull, and they're robotic. Okay, and most things have been run by stupid, robotic, dull people who can't feel for they're locked, and they're dangerous. They're really, really dangerous. And I can tell you that if it wasn't for I've been waiting 20 years for the technologies to come along which allow like these financial and legal instruments, and from the sort of top end, from the sort of structural side, but also from social, where we can start behaving as we did do before industrialization, what I call LORE, the kind of the cultural rules and the norms that we live by, and cohesion. What excites me about Holochain, I would say blockchain, is blockchain can do the LAW, but not the LORE as well. And Holochain can pull the two together, and we can learn to live on this planet. We're here for a very short period of time. I can vouch for that. I've got what, 5, 10, 15, 20 years left, and then I die and I leave. And it really focuses you. It's just like, well, what can I do? And what's possible to be done? And why would you? Do I want to spend the rest of the time earning enough so that I could buy a better sofa to sit on, or a car with a better stripe on, or far bigger exhaust? Or, I mean, what is it that you would want to do? You're here on this planet. It's beautiful. Do you want to kill people? Do you want to hurt people? What do you want to do? And that's what those young children, they will, in their hearts, their intention, they want to make they want to turn the planet around and make it work. And at the moment, everywhere where it's going is the opposite direction. The only thing that can change, the only thing that can help this, is that we aggregate the economic, social, and political power of these tribal groups, if you like, these groups which have some commonality. And I spent 15 years waiting for you guys to come along and build this technology, by the way. And Arthur, thank you. But I've been waiting. So that, because I knew you couldn't do it without that, where you could actually create constructs that will actually really allow that to be not just a conceptual thing, but a practical thing. And not so that we go around destroying and killing things like other people do, let's kill the banks or whatever. I mean, whether we need banks or not will shake out. What we can do is, if we aggregate, and what I keep my mantra to young people is, we don't need to get mad, we just need to get even. If we aggregate enough power, just say through consumerism, if we all decided that we would, because things only exist by sentiment, power only exists because we the way we feel about it. Yeah, we'll let them screw us, we'll let them run things, we'll let them kill the planet, especially the older people, not the young Gretas of the generation. They're going to say, no, We're not going to let you do that. The beauty is we've got probably about 10 or 15 years to create the infrastructure on scale. And I don't mean just little nice things that happen at community level where I can, and it's nice, you have to start there, but where we can aggregate it so we can actually turn everything around. And we've only got, 15, 20, 30 years before we're going to get to points of no return. And whereby it would be where not just in terms of timing on the environment, but where you would still got enough social cohesion for people to crowds to actually work together, where they're not terrified or frightened, or where there's war, or whether there's just so many people have become so disenfranchised that they're really just in survival mode. Okay, so we've got that period of time, and those who understand and can do something about this will probably, like me, feel a great responsibility to come together and pool our resources and pool our efforts so they can pool their power and reform the culture of those corporations, reform the culture of our governance systems to a point that we may transform them beyond recognition, but we don't have to be violent. There's no need, and it's counterproductive. We can do this with what drives us, whether that's as individuals, a kind of a kindness. If what you feel is a love towards the humanity, that's the most powerful stuff. So that's what I feel, and I'm driven day and night because I can see it's possible, and I understand what it's not if I don't. So I'm not allowed to talk about that too often because people want to slit their wrists after they've been talking with me. But and if it wasn't for the fact that I can see this is possible, I wouldn't even bother. I'd be sat in the corner. I'd give up. But I'm not. I'm so driven. And so again, thank you to the technologists who started, blockchain and Web3, but Holochain. That's the thing that's going to be the enabler.
Yeah, can you explain to everyone a little bit more about that? Like what, I think I'm a little bit unstable here. What's new? But explain a little bit more. So you said you've been waiting 15, 20 years for Holochain to exist. Can you explain a little bit more what you've been waiting for and what it does and what you see possible because of that? I feel like you touched on it, but just a little bit deeper.
Well, 20 years ago, if you go back even further than that, I had a vision of a thing called the internet and finally got that published. I'll send you a copy of it in the UK in the Telegraph. And that was where we were explaining a thing called the internet, which no one had heard about, how it was going to change. So in William Gibson's articulation, science-fi writer, it was a place for any information, anytime, any place, anywhere. Later on, that became for commerce. But 20 years ago, I said the next big thing is going to be not technology. We can see where that's going. It will be the fact that you can put these legal instruments. So you needed 3. It was promissory notes, which is what most people think of money and settlements. It was the ability to give legal consent so that, for example, someone you trust, you can pass on, so like a stock exchange broker, but I'm talking about on globally. So you don't have to have a corporate structure. You have these informal elements, and you can create syndicates and relationships with peer-to-peer, and those syndicates can work with other syndicates. So as you could eventually be able to purchase whatever you wanted as mass groups. And receive the same benefits as a multinational, even if you're a relatively small group. So that was there, plus the ability, which is important, of bona fides. Everyone's focused on ID, but you don't need to give ID if you want to buy a newspaper in a shop with a £1 or $1 or €1 or whatever. No one says, well, can I get your ID and when was your mum born and all of that stuff. Because your bona fides is like your money is legal tender. They have no reason to suspect you have ill intent. So I'll give you my money and mind your own business. And you can do that digitally as well. There's no reason why anyone asks you about anything if you can demonstrate your bona fides, which might be someone vouching that he's for you. But anyway, so I saw that years ago, and I was waiting for that. And blockchain kind of gave that, which was so exciting. What Holochain takes it to the next stage is that it truly is. People talk about decentralization. Of course, if you've got a few people writing the code, or if it's all controlled or orchestrated from a centralized point or in unison with each other, it ain't central. So what we're looking at is, well, how do we go down to where it's just peer-to-peer and Holochain and syndication? So Holochain gives you the ability to enter into agreements to behave in the way that you want to, both in terms of compliance with jurisdictional laws or whatever you have to, or business agreements, but more importantly, socially. And how, and in the future, that's going to be so important, because if you can aggregate your power, who will you do it with? You'll probably do it with local geographic communities. You'll do it with something that you care about, that you find important. That might be your profession, like a digital guild of. Imagine if all of the programmers in the world aggregated their purchasing power, and actually imagine how powerful they'd be. All right. And I did this with Toyota, Toyota proper. What happens when the day when someone knocks on the door and says, I represent 55% of what you purchase, what you make. And I'm here, and I'm going to tell you that if you don't behave, if you don't give us, they'll do what the big guys, supermarkets, do to farmers today, which will say, well, I'm not just going to pay you a margin. I'll let you make 8 points profit, and the rest of it, I'll just take the vehicle. But of course, then there was explained to them, they would also say, and it has to be green and it has to last 50 years because that's what we want. And if you don't do it, I'll switch to someone tomorrow. That's the early stage of aggregation. It will be around money, but then it can't just be money, otherwise it falls over. You're just using game theory. Holochain allows you then to actually capture if something is so important, you will self-sacrifice some of that for common good, because you become even more powerful. So what Holochain excited me about is that you can construct those agreements. Like Belinda and myself might have something like a Facebook app, but we can decide where we store that, where the computations occur. But more importantly, we can agree how things are done, whether anyone even knows about it, and we might get other people. So it means that you don't have to conform to the technological blockchain or the perfect system which someone thought up. You can actually create your own network. You can have your own membrane of who comes in there. But you can then coexist with others without merging with them, staying separate, staying with your own values, but cross-fertilizing as you need to. And that's what is that granularity that excited me about Holochain, apart from the fact it's scalable and it would actually work and all of those good things. It's actually this thing that you can going to bring cohesion together, but not where it's dictated by system or anybody else, but where it can form through quite natural inclinations, depending on whoever you are and wherever you are. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, super. It makes as much sense as anyone who describes why Holochain is important always goes off and gives this answer.
I'm not a technologist, but I actually work with and have done with some of the greatest technologies like Tannenbaum. And it was interesting because when Tannenbaum was, a lot of the programmers would have read all his books. So he was kind of like the guy in Silicon Valley that Silicon Valley turned to in its decline to ask, well, what should we do in order to, make Silicon Valley work? This is way before most of the people listening to this would even know that they're in trouble, but that's how old I am. And of course, he said, well, use the thing, link up people, not institutions or organizations, because innovative people are that despite who they work for. And we'll use a thing called the internet, which no one in Silicon Valley really knew what was at the time. And we'll do that to join people up. So but I asked Tannenbaum why I was there. Why did you need me? Because some of the people, they were gods, I mean, they would talk about protocols one day and it was embedded in the net the next week. They would come up with these ideas and suddenly they had, 20 million thrown at them in a day or two to go and build something. And I was just jaw drop of these little nets. And I was saying, well, I'm not one of those. I'm a data scientist. I'm not anything. And he said, well, firstly, you walk the talk. But secondly, he said, we understand how to predict things, how to build things structured around logic. But he said, you can do fuzzy logic. You can factor in human beings and other natural stuff that we think is of fuzzy, but you don't. And you can confidently predict that and add that within the total equation, and you can get it right. And we don't, that's weird, and we don't understand how you do it. And I said, well, I don't either, but it works. It's only later on that I learned how to methodize it. And that's if you like, Holochain, because you can construct it however you want. It means you can construct it to work in these beautiful models which mimic what I would call natural stuff, but I'm talking more to do, not some, it can do kind of nature natural, but it can also do quantum mechanics, which is what we need in terms of being able to generate enough activity, enough heat, enough movement, enough flow of these currencies that we can generate between human beings in the shortest period of time to actually make this work. Because it's not going to be money that does this, it's going to be value. And value is got to be measurable. So value in my book is if someone says value and they talk about value chain, unless they can measure it, capture it, and apply it, it's not value in my book. So I can take, that's a benefit. So I can take a benefit, and even a measured benefit, and determine what the value is, and then for what the worth is. And that will tell you to the individual, map it to everything, of whether it's value to them based upon their criteria, not on yours. And then I can tell you whether it will work. I can give you the odds of that working both in small, and then how that will, in a complex system, manifest over a period of time, and what direction it will take. And that's what the first app we're doing has 3 steps in it. One is just, it looks really simple, and it is so elegant. It's taken me 20 years to do.
Could I ask you, as you're describing it, to get the app up and show people?
Yeah, I can. If you give us a, can I screen share this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So you can see my screen now.
Indeed.
Okay. That's my next curriculum I'm writing. I'm writing a new course for Holt next year on how to differentiate yourself from a robot, which of course is by being human, but how to take those human attributes into day-to-day business. But that's really cool. So firstly, there's the Academy, and that is, digital value capture, teachable.com anyway. So that's the Digital Academy, which we've got, which does all the teaching modules that Belinda was talking about. And to give you an idea, we take what I teach in Holt, which, would probably cost those students, I don't know, 1,200 euros to attend my bit, my course. We've now got that down, which with the Problem Buster and the Deep Dive, we've got that down to how much?
I mean, if you're confident and capable, you can get out of it for well under $100.
Okay, and I've got the students now helping, so we can get that going. So that's basically that's where you can go and find lots of lovely, yummy stuff. And you go there first, then you can get the app from there. But if I take you, I just bring up to the app. So the one that you can play with today for free is the Problem Buster module. You can go to the dashboard. Let's just have a look.
We do the case study.
Case study, no emergency. So so it's dashboard, it's got a number of questions. It actually works as a questionnaire where you have to answer, and it tells you what questions you need to know, and then it suggests what questions to ask people to find out. If you're not sure, you click this button here, and I've spent weeks putting videos together as a course, next to it. But if you go into the into the academy, it's all laid out. So you can either do, a new startup and a new enterprise. This is one I've done earlier. So this is where it takes basically, the notion is you've got a good idea to solve a problem. And so it starts with the problem. So rather than build a piece of technology and then look to see if you can find a problem to fix, you come backwards and you validate the problem. So this problem buster validates a couple of things. Will it solve the problem? Will it address the problems that they care about, not just you, to the point where you can get some funding and get moving? Will it reduce sufficient operational pain to the actors, the people who use it, for them to adopt it? And will it generate sufficient aspirations, or will it meet what they want to do? As well, and it also eventually gives you it gives you a calculation of your level of confidence versus their willing. So whether you're overconfident to the reality, if your problem sucks, it's not a good idea. If your good idea sucks, it's not a good idea. If it doesn't work, it can't be good. And most good ideas don't work at all. Until you refine them. So you basically go through, you put things in. So these are the problems that we were looking at getting. And this was problem, someone has a good idea for a medical emergency. You need, whenever you need, if you ever find yourself needing first aid or to end up in a hospital or an ambulance or whatever, the good idea is that that they would have the information which would help them save your life and make better decisions in a matter of seconds rather than not. So the idea of this app is that anyone in those circumstances could have exactly what they want that you could never find in a system, because it also includes your circumstances. So it's everything that the system that might exist in a system somewhere, but it's brought into a way where it can be given, which is what they do face to face. So you just go through a series of this, and each section it gives you, I haven't done this one, a report. I think this one's, yeah, okay. So in each section, you've got a report, so in this case, you do the organizational, the startup, the ecosystem. So there's all the people, what are the things they care about? So you can at a glance just look at everything and see whether anyone cares and how much they care, what the magnitude is. And then you work through you look at the pain points, and it will show you that's the pain that people experience and the magnitude of it. Then you do a real life scenario, which is quite testing. And what's beautiful here is people will tell you. So you say, listen, if in that situation you ask the triage nurse, or you ask the person who's treating you, or you ask people who've been in that situation, what is the nature of the pain when someone treats you wrong, doesn't know what to do, or you can't. In this scenario, someone has an episode at work delivering a parcel with diabetes. You'll love this. It's on a remote farm in Queensland, so of course it's even more complex, but that's quite often the case. You work out what it is, you determine what it needs to be. Most people think that if you improve on what someone's got now, they'll take it. They won't. They'll only be interested in it if it gets to what they need it to be. So I have to teach students how to listen, how to feel people's pain, like what you asked them. And then once that's your benchmark, my good idea has to deliver those needs. And no one's going to use it. We go into the
just to be clear, I'm asking them
Yeah.
to feel their own pain, because if they can't
Yeah.
feel their own, what are they really feeling when they experience somebody else's, but just a projection of their own? And I think what you're asking for people to do is transcend that into deeply being able to sit with themselves to see the as is and the to be in somebody else.
That's why the other reason for Belinda, she's only admitting so far that it's a good translator to me, but Belinda does all of that stuff, which is beyond me completely. So we're merging those things together so that people, part of that learning will be for people to be able to do that.
Yeah, one of the one one of the reasons why I'm fascinated by and you know, and sync with Stephen as a person, and particularly I'm going to say as a man, is that he thinks deeply about and feels deeply about and genuinely cares about some things that, in my experience, historically has been relatively unusual for men to think about, feel deeply about, and genuinely care about. And that includes not just the whole question of value and what really is valuable and what has worth and to whom, but also this thing about pain. Yeah. Who's in pain and why, and can we make that better for them, and how can we do that? So he and I share a real not just interest in that, but you know, a pretty deep commitment to bringing the skills and the talents that we have within ourselves to bear in different environments. You know, that I do one-on-one work with people on trauma, which has really informed my understanding of pain and how people live with pain and how you can navigate through and around and an experience of pain to at an individual level, and then also at a systems level. I was going to say before, when Stephen was talking about Holochain, one of the things that I found fascinating about Holochain right from the very beginning is that, having had experience in the tech industry in a very male-dominated company, working for, by and large, a lot of men who were pretty fascinated with fairly short-term gain and fairly narrowly focused around some, you know, a very few criteria of success. Holochain, you know, having dealt with essentially a lot of what I call inhumane technology, Holochain felt to me from the beginning like it had at least the potential to allow space for what has historically been not necessarily female, but more feminine ways of thinking and feeling and acting and conceptualizing problems and devising solutions to problems. And so I'm pretty interested in the potential Holochain has, by virtue of its DNA as a technology platform, to create more space for women to work in tech and to come up with technology-driven solutions to problems where they're not so reliant on male technical expertise, or maybe masculine technical expertise, to bring their ideas to life.
It's fabulous, huh? And it's true. It's because if you view this from, say, a quantum mechanics kind of explanation of why, because my methodology, I didn't invent it, I observed it. What I've invented is the you know, the kind of binary linear methodology on how to actually go about teaching it and applying it until such time as you get it yourself. Because if you observe it, you already know what my model works like. It's just there. And when I talk to people, suddenly the light goes on because they sense parts of it. But if it's like what you're seeing on the screen now, if you understand what, firstly, pain reduction, if you ever ask somebody what it has to be, they won't say get rid of it totally, because they're realistic, and we are. We can take a lot, stress and all sorts. We just want it so that we can breathe it. And they usually say half, whatever they say it is today. Now you say, get it to that, and I can function, I can breathe, I can look. And what happens in that incredible state where you alleviate that pain, is something absolutely it is magic. It's beautiful. It's explainable, because and quantum explains it better, which is that suddenly you can see things different. You can suddenly see the possibility. So if your app or if your platform not only relieves pain but gives people the capacity. So for example, because my methodology is already embedded in other methodologies and being used. So if we take healthcare, where people are self-managing their chronic disease, which is, we've been researching and trialing this methodology met with another one. People who feel no hope and feel there's no possibility because they're in so much pain and have no aspiration at all other than, and even in the cases where they're going to die, they'll say, yeah, but that's what the doctor said. I'll die. It's going to take, 2 years for my legs to be chopped off from diabetes and then I'll pack up at that time. And and it's just like, apathy and just frozen. But if and we didn't know what would happen, but by actually taking people on what was this course on how they could work out where they were going and what the possibilities were that they could actually alleviate and reverse, in some cases, reverse that diabetes so they wouldn't, or to mitigate most of those problems. What would happen is as soon as they saw that possibility, then something else happened. Another heat came in, not the heat of pain, but the heat of desire and aspiration. And that drove them. That's another currency, and it drives you in a different direction. So we're about to start mapping that out, and of course then capturing that, and so that you can see, in this case, the 2B is where this good idea could get people way past their needs to be. And there's a fourth measurement that you go back later, and you don't normally ask to begin with, because no one will be able to know what you're talking about if you ask them about aspirations when they're just in complete pain. It's just like you're actually part of the problem, asking them stupid questions. You just give them a break, and then we go back later. So we do this, and eventually what we do in the final report, we have different, the capability set here. It's not just the blockchain isn't the solution itself, because you need other elements as well. So we teach how to work out what you need. You need some financials, you need some understanding of governance.
Let me click on that.
Yeah. So you need, those are just some of the capabilities you need, tamper-proof records. But I get people to describe it without having to be technical experts, so that this creates a report. They sit down with a developer and say, well, this is what I need and it will work. Do you know how to build it? And then, of course, that's when the ingenuity can occur between them both. But we also, in the next stage, not in this one, you don't need to do it, but when you go in the deep dive, we also include human attributes. So what happens if you put kindness into your solution? And that can even be something like complete reform, say of healthcare reform or telco, because at the moment, let's say a telco has to shrink, it has to do a digital transformation and optimization. At the moment, brutality is used. People come in, they get cut, bish bosh, and it's the manner of it, because that is argued as being the most cost-effective way of doing is brutality, but it's not. But you've got no measurements. I can provide the measurements to validate on a spreadsheet the value impact of kindness on that transformation, that it's more cost effective. You also get better results. So we can, actually we can help traditional business. But so when you get that full report, at the end, it takes, it generates a report, 18-page report, goes through with all of the different sections that you need, where it is, what you need, the good idea. And of course, it gives you some scores in here. And it tells you this is the best bit at the bottom. So it tells you their willingness. Now that calculates all of the measurements you put in, and it does it relatively simplistic in this model. When you go down, it really drills into it. So you take their willingness to fund you, their willingness to adopt it, their willingness in terms of to reach those aspirations. It shows you where that is on the quadrant, and your confidence. Now, coming back to here, you'll find blokes, males, can be totally confident, 100% confident, where their willingness is 100% zero. because they're, you know, and what they'll do if they're not, if they feel self-doubt, they'll go on an actualization course, or they'll go and get motivated. They'll become more aggressive, and that worked in the old world. Do you remember? I used to always annoy me that, you know, they'll come in the next day with half a dozen spreadsheets and just bully their way through. In the intellectual world, that doesn't work. And what's interesting is you'll see females underconfidence, even when people are totally willing. And that's actually a higher score on here because they're pragmatic. They're seeing all those possibilities. And then of course, in your own dashboard, you can then get to see all the projects you've done on where it fits, you know, where that dot fits and whether it's in the sweet spot. But it will basically tell you whether your good idea sucks or whether it needs readjusting, or whether it's just go and get another good idea, but keep doing it until it's going to work. And then you drop down to the next one. It's very simple, but it's so, and it's taken years to make it simple and elegant, but it asks just the right questions so that you can get that determination. And then you can send that to somebody. You can even send that to get a quote for someone to build it for you. You can get a quote for help, you know, in terms of financing. So, but it means someone's got something that they can look at and really get their head around, to get that early seeding or that early support to build a plan, to get your development plan, get your business plan. And that's where the next stage helps you, because that creates a report which calculates the probability. This is calculates the confidence willingness. That calculates the probability of it working by virtue of the problems and the value it generates. And it also determines how much and what type of value you would generate and how much of that could be captured. The third module to the app, which comes out later this year, shows you how to capture it, tokenize it, and trade it.
Can you stop sharing?
Yeah.
And just check, is this Eduardo and the ACE team, did they build that with you?
Yeah, and it's already back end gets switched over to Holochain as soon as it's ready to go, as are all the projects that we're doing.
And David, I want to say something about why it feels to me, to both of us, that the timing of this is kind of sweet, you know. So the culture of Silicon Valley in particular, and the culture of traditional venture capital investing, probably globally, particularly in Silicon Valley, but globally, has embraced and rewarded risk-taking to a fault. Yeah, so you were crazy, so everybody's crazy brave about risk, and the system's just awash with money, and the more risk you are willing to take, and you know, as either a company founder or somebody with an idea, and as an investor, the more people will regard you as a god. Yeah, regardless of whether you're successful. In fact, there's that whole thing in Silicon Valley about, you know, the more and the bigger your failures up to a point, the more credibility you have. Yeah. So we could talk about the pros and cons of that at you know, just in any kind of economic environment, whether that's really a good way to run things. But the pragmatic reality now, given that, well, you know, the global economy is in collapse as we speak after COVID shutdowns, etc. And the pragmatic reality is that people's appetite for risk has shifted, both for investors, but particularly for founders. You know, people can less afford to spend lots and lots of time, effort, and money on something that is really speculative, you know, where you don't really know if it's going to work. Yeah, it used to be, I used to say, the biggest monetary prize goes to the most confident dickhead in the room, right? That's not true anymore, apart from a few kind of bubbles that are still operating that way. And so it feels like really sweet timing to be introducing into the world, online marketplace, a set of tools and education services that can help purpose-driven entrepreneurs, so the kinds of people who we would all want to see succeed, to help them take risk out of their projects, to help them understand better whether their ideas are likely to work before they actually make huge investments or seek huge investments. So it's a fun thing to be working on. It was fun already, and then as this year has unfolded, it's just gotten more and more interesting that this is what we're working on as this unfolds in the broader economic and social context.
There's another interesting twist to that, because at the moment, like when we got different audiences. So if we got an audience which are crypto orientated, then they're looking at either long-term investments. They're looking at their skills in gaming, gambling in my terminology, but it's or speculation, if you like, and they're also and if you haven't got any capital, then you have to be pretty good at gaming. So what this allows someone to do is effectively generate their own tokens, their own asset-based tokens. I'm calling it, where you create your own gold by creating assets, or through these currencies, which already are there today, through being more innovative in the way that you do things today, and that interest there. What was important to mention, why one of the reasons I've been waiting to get this app going, is that in that second, we already do in the first bit, we assign the ownership of all the data to the individual that they generate. And that in the second part, that means we turn that into a legal instrument, a legal artifact. So it's actually in law common, it's kind of under law, as around the world, it's private property. So you can actually then leverage off existing regulations to say, what's in this box is mine. It's actually got my name on it. I own it. And therefore I can give my consent for it to be used. I can then trade it. And it makes life creates a lot more certainty. And I've used a lot of that kind of logic is what happened in cultures way before industrialization. So it's mimicking back there, but most of the legal instruments we have today in our day-to-day law they've got corrupted in the way they're being used. But even the idea of an agreement, the most important thing, doesn't matter whether it's signed or even written. What's more important is whether it was witnessed, because the more witnesses you have, the less likely it is you'll bend the truth. Okay, and become more accountable, and it's easier to create dispute resolutions with witnesses present who're willing to be doing things. So what I see is in the dev camp, apart from the technicians, we need 3 core skill sets. We need the ability to have traditionally what you call finance, but let's call it value, including all those currencies that people would find odd at the moment, intangible currencies, but you need someone who get their head around that. You need people what you would normally call governance and compliance, but that's for LORE. And if the group wants to interact with the rest of the world, then they have to take into account, LAW, like things like privacy legislation, all those kind of things. The third one is interrelationships. You have to have someone to understand, well, if all this gets connected with people, systems, robots, and everything, how does that all make sense? And like going back in the early 80s, you couldn't get all of those multiple skills in a single person. So we had to have all these teams because no one understood and cross-fertilization, and they'd argue and fight, and it was a nightmare. And we're going to get all of that, because if you just build it from a technological point of view, the weakness, if you like, or the double-edged sword, I think I'm way better putting it, of Holochain, is you could actually create some stuff which could get a lot of people into trouble, because you can write whatever structural rules that exist, and to the uninitiated they might find themselves using an app which actually they're doing something illegal without knowing it, and the people who made it it wasn't their job to give consideration towards that. So the dev teams will find themselves very quickly either having to just use something off the shelf that someone built, like blockchain. Here's the way the blockchain works. You can't kind of go wrong. Here, you can do anything, and therein is a double-edged sword. And so I see a lot more collaboration happening, a lot more synergies between those different kind of skill sets and disciplines.
I think that's been a brilliant overview. Is there anything? I would love to, I'm not sure if you guys would be up for it, but I would love to then record a Holochain project going through the process.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I think that would be really fun.
Well, I had a wonderful conversation with Guillaume the other day at your suggestion. We finally got together with Eduardo and him.
Awesome.
In Spain, looking at how do we do the agreements. And he is, apart from being a marvelous person, it's so insightful. Like you said, seriously clever. We cracked it, and it was interesting. He volunteered the idea of let's look at a soccer game to actually understand how all that works. Everyone's a referee, and then and how you can call someone out, and how gossip works. So you can put them out. It was just fabulous. So yes, we can do all those things I spoke about, and it would be fabulous to do that. A health commons may well be one of those early ones which actually cracks this issue of how do you coexist with the old world with health systems, and yet at the same time create all these fabulous, empower these groups to actually self-manage their own chronic disease. And at the same time, what Catherine's got is create a legal commons of the knowledge of what works, so that common becomes common wisdom, is then protected from being corrupted by any other force, as well as the individual being able to generate the value of the analytics they do of discovering in their life what works to manage it, and be able to capture that and use that to help them in their life. It's the most awesome thing. And if that to be on Holochain and go through the machinations of how do you do that, that would touch on just about everything I could think of that you would need touching on in one go.
Okay, I'm officially out of words.
Yes, me too.
Firstly, I don't believe it, but I think it was a very, very polite. A very polite and skillful way of bringing our conversation to a close. So I appreciate that.
I'm learning.
Personally, I think that you guys could be going for another 5 hours. So and so could I. But let's save.
That's brilliant. I really enjoyed that. It was so lovely what you're asking. I would love to do that again and drill down into some things.
Yep.
Because and especially where we start really exploring, practically speaking, what those benefits would do. And I think, as I say, bearing in mind that Health Commons has been built explicitly to migrate to Holochain as soon as possible, and then we've also got to deal with that, with systems integrators and APIs and all sorts of things. That would be pretty interesting.
And we should do one that's well thought through and that works.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we also need to find one that has a few big holes in it, because actually people will learn as much, if not more, from seeing an idea go through. And
okay, well, we can pick one of my ideas for that, because I've got hundreds of ideas over the years that have got big holes in them. But that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. And I think, okay. Well, let's organizer. And meanwhile, thank you very much, Belinda and Stephen. It was wonderful, and it's great, Stephen, to see, you know, all of our discussions over the last couple of years. It's good.
We haven't deviated from anything either. Any of us have said a millimeter. We're very tenacious. One has to be in this. But also, what's fabulous is we're right on the money, and it's frustratingly exciting at the moment because we're on the cusp of being able to actually do it.
Yep.
That's just the worst place in the world to be, because you're ready for it almost.
Yep.
And you can't quite yet do it. And it's just, you know, you're holding everything like a plate balancer in the circus to keep it all going. So keep that code coming, okay?
Don't look at me.
I'm talking to in the royal we.
Yeah.
In case anyone from Holochain ever watches your program.
There's definitely a few. All right.
And on a final note, there is something we'd like to talk to on some stage, coming back to Belinda's thing. Here's an interesting thing that I observed from this latest hackathon we're helping. If the actual process of developing most of it, you know, how you've created a compiler to make life a lot easier and a lot quicker for coding. Imagine if for some of those you can either go the Eduardo route of building Lego pieces that can be constructed very easy, but all the way to almost like a WYSI editor, like we used to dream of in the days when you had to hard code C program websites.
No code development.
Yeah,
I've got a feeling.
That,
I've got a feeling that's kind of along the lines of what Phil Beadle is. It should be getting him to demo his stuff next week. Although, do you know what, Phil? I think when you're saying next week, you actually mean next month. But let's see. But I think there's definitely the potential for that is there. And my experience of the Holochain.
Phil's been doing is music to my ears.
Yeah.
And it's just, but I've looked at it. When you go to the next stage and you don't need any code, what's going to happen? Let's take these hackathons, because it's going to be like, okay, when you enable these girls and women, and I don't like talking so much in general, but let's start with it, because what I'm talking about is the future is what I'm calling feminine, in the same way that you would call Mother Earth. Okay, the neural network, and the kind of environment that you guys are going to usher in, favors those who understand nurturing, favors those who understand joining dots, and all sorts of things, you know, in there. But it means at the moment, what I notice a lot of these hackathons is that the confident guys get all the oxygen. They pull it. They're the ones who are pulling the teams together, and they got girls either helping them, or there's a group of ladies or girls and young women. I mean, in Babylon, it's been fabulous, from Bangladesh and areas, and their insight, the kind of problems they want to solve, are so insightful, but they cannot deliver because they're not, unless they become not just coders, but until they get masculines and then get on top and sort of get on top of the chain. If you can get rid of that, I think Holochain is going to unblock and meet the demands of all of those groups we're seeing of women in blockchain and technology. And I've been encouraging women, say in government and corporate, for 30 years because what they do in government and corporate is the men have the capital expenditure control, the big dollars, and they give the OPEX, the operational cost, to females who are subordinate to them in these corporate structures and government. They always are. And it's mostly white old guys at the top. And yet the women are far more innovative and efficient. But as soon as they don't need that, and as soon as they don't need capital, they're going to change the world. And you would unleash something, and that would be worth following, because what you would do to that, because it would, imagine young innovative women around the world, would they create projects that destroy the planet? I think not.
Okay. On that note, until next time.
Thanks, David. Cheers.